Hello, Pittsburgh. I'm Zac Gibson, and this is Trib Lives from the Newsroom podcast, bringing you top stories from TribLive.com. Today, we're looking inside one of the most sacred and secretive transitions on Earth, the period following the death of a pope. Since the passing of Pope Francis, the Vatican has entered a time known as sede vacante, or the vacant seat, and centuries-old rituals are now underway to choose his successor. From sealing rooms to white smoke and solemn oaths, we're unpacking the tradition, terminology, and timeline that define the road to a new pope. Here to guide us through it is TribLive reporter Renatta Signorini. Hi, Renatta.
Hi, Zac. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So let's talk about the magnitude of news like this. Pope Francis died on Monday, Easter Monday, and it was announced early that morning. Obviously, the timing of that had very gravitas tones to it, and it's world-shaking news. The position of Pope is revered in almost every nation, if not every nation. So what is it like as a reporter to cover the local impacts, to shed light on the local impacts of news that really shakes the world?
Whenever I woke up on Monday, I had the notification from the Associated Press on my phone that the Pope had died, and immediately I'm like, okay, it's going to be a crazy day. So by the time I got to work, everything was already up on the website, and there was a reporter headed to Pittsburgh to go to a mass that morning, and I was asked to go to a mass in Greensburg, and another reporter went to a mass in a different area, and then we had another reporter connecting with the bishop in Pittsburgh, and I also talked with the bishop in Greensburg. It doesn't happen very often that there is such a global story that we get to report on a local level, so it's almost a privilege that we get to take a small role in that. I mean, when I walked into Blessed Sacrament Cathedral in Greensburg, and there was a portrait of Pope Francis there at the front of the church with all the Easter flowers, Easter lilies, and hydrangeas, it just kind of really sunk in, like, oh, this is a big deal. I'm doing something here in small Greensburg that's thousands of miles away from Rome, but, it's still extremely important to the 60 or so people who came to the church that day to pray and show their respects for the Pope.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this long series of processes that many people are going to be tuned in for over the coming weeks. So we are currently into and past some of these processes, but we will start from declaring the death of the Pope, and we will lead up into the choosing and the first blessing of the Pope's successor. So this first point is declaring the death, and this official first step in this process is the confirmation of the Pope's death. Now, this is done by the Chamberlain, or what's known as the Camerlengo. It's a largely ceremonial job, and it's currently held by Cardinal Kevin Farrell, an Irish-born American citizen who is the head of the Vatican's laity office. So he has the task of sealing the Pope's private rooms, and he assumes administrative duties until a new Pope is elected. Now, I also believe it is his job to destroy the Pope's ring that is created for him when he becomes the Pope with a specific ceremonial hammer, and the ring is destroyed so that no one can forge documents as Pope Francis. So he runs these administrative and financial duties of the Holy See until the new Pope takes over. Now, that process began on Monday. Next, we have the period of sede vacante, which we are currently in, which means the vacant seat. This is the period between a pope's death and the time when the new pope takes his seat and accepts the role. So nearly all of the prefects or position holders within the Vatican at the point of the Pope's death will lose their positions, except for a few key figures like the foreign minister or the master of liturgical ceremonies to help some of the processes that must continue. These Vatican operations will shift into temporary governance to help focus on preparing for the conclave, which is one of the most secretive processes that the world has its eyes on in the coming weeks. So we now are going into the funeral rites for Pope Francis and his funeral wishes. Something that was interesting that we will get into shortly is the different way that Pope Francis has designed his own funeral. The Pope's body currently lies in state at St. Peter's Basilica for public mourning. The funeral mass for a pope must happen within 4 to 6 days after the death. Pope Francis's funeral will take place this Saturday. After this process, we begin Novendiali, the 9 days of mourning with daily liturgies, which are prayers, scripture readings, and other elements that help this congregation to engage in a communal act of worship, marking and remembering the life of Pope Francis. As I mentioned at the top of this section, Pope Francis reformed his own funeral to emphasize humility. Now, typically, funeral processions and ceremonies for the Pope really emphasize the power and grandiosity of the position of Pope, but Pope Francis decided to eliminate multi-layered coffins and grand platforms for a more modest display to focus on the humility of being a religious servant rather than the weight of a position such as the Pope.
The Pope actually did make those changes in November 24, so less than a year ago, where he simplified the rites for his funeral, like you were saying, Zach, moving towards a more simple wooden casket. And the reason that he wanted to be buried at St. Mary Major Basilica is because that is where his favorite icon of the Virgin Mary is. So before and after every foreign trip, he would go to that basilica to pray before the painting that features an image of Mary draped in a blue robe holding the infant Jesus. It was a place that was special to him and continues to be special to him in the afterlife as well. While his body is lying in state at St. Peter's Basilica for the public can come and visit, pay their respects through midnight on Wednesday and Thursday, and then the public period of mourning is going to end at 7 p.m. on Friday. So you can just imagine the thousands of people that would be coming through there and just like what the scene looks like there. It's kind of hard to imagine from so far away, but it would be really interesting to see and be there.
Absolutely. So after Saturday's funeral processes, the next event of this papal transition that people will have their eyes on is the conclave. So in preparing for the conclave, there has to be someone in charge to make sure the processes run smoothly. At this time, the College of Cardinals becomes the primary body in managing church affairs. The dean of the college is Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, who is 91 years old, and he organizes the conclave and presides over the funeral mass. Now, before the conclave, we have what is called the general congregations. The cardinals will gather together to discuss church issues and logistical planning. All cardinals under 80 may vote within the conclave. Those over 80 can still attend these pre-conclave meetings through general congregations.
According to the Vatican statistics, there are 136 cardinals under 80 years old, so that would be the number that are eligible to vote, but regulations limit the number of electors to 120 cardinals.
Okay. I believe you said, Renatta, that the conclave must start between 15 and 20 days after the Pope's death, around May 5th to May 10th.
Correct.
Okay. Now, this conclave will take place in the Sistine Chapel, and the cardinals stay at the Domus Santa Marta, the guest house, during this time. At the beginning of the conclave, the phrase extra omnes is declared, which means everyone out. All those who are not voting cardinals have to vacate so that the conclave can take place. Now, this phrase extra omnes is spoken by the master of papal liturgical celebrations to begin the voting process. The conclave voting process is one of the most sacred and secretive processes that takes place in the Catholic Church. And it's something that has enamored bodies of both news and general public alike, the different inner workings of how this process works, even though it's not something that you will get to visually see happen. I will also note that the recent release of the film Conclave, depicting a dramatized story taking place within this process of selecting a new pope, has seen a stark rise in viewership since the Pope's death on Monday. According to Popbase, Conclave viewership increased by 283% following the passing of Pope Francis.
It is a very secretive process, the conclave. The liturgical assistants and secretaries, they take an oath that they have to keep what happens in the conclave secret in perpetuity, and they are forbidden from using any audio or video recording devices. So anyone who breaks that oath can face automatic excommunication from the church.
These cardinals that are voting in the conclave are also not allowed access to TVs, radios, phones for any type of contact with the outside world. Now, during this vote, the ballots are said to contain the phrase Eligio in Summum Pontificem, which means I elect as Supreme Pontiff.
So this is actually pretty interesting too. So the cardinals can actually consider naming any baptized Roman Catholic man to be pope. But since 1378, only cardinals have been picked for the job. Once the cardinal writes the name on their ballot, they'll fold the paper in half, walk to the front of the Sistine Chapel, and declare the oath as follows: I call as my witness Christ, the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be elected. And then that ballot is put on a tray and tipped into a receptacle.
Okay. There are positions within this voting process to help assist in ensuring its integrity. Scrutineers, revisers, and infirmari are there in place for different purposes. The infirmari collect the votes of cardinals who are confined to their rooms for infirmity or weakness, whether physical, mental, or otherwise. And the scrutineers add up all the votes and are assisted by the revisers who check the ballots and names on the scrutineers' list to ensure that no errors were made, so that there is an accurate count and vote for each running or process of the election. Now, to win an election, a candidate must accrue 2/3 of the votes. If not, this process is repeated. And many people associate the imagery of the conclave with the signal of the smoke, the black or white smoke. After each vote, the ballots are burned with chemical cartridges. Black smoke means there has been no decision, or the pope that was selected did not accept the position, while white smoke signals the cardinals have chosen a pope and that he has accepted. Bells will also ring to confirm a successful election. Now, in the event of an unsuccessful election, a voting process can take place 4 times within a day, twice in the morning and twice later in the day.
I think it's interesting to consider how many people might be, around in that area waiting for smoke, watching for smoke, what their reaction might be when they see black smoke, and then what their reaction might be when they see white smoke.
I do remember at the time of the last conclave at my house, the news with its eyes on the Vatican on constantly waiting for that white or black smoke. Even as a child, I remembered the significance it held for even my household, not being a Catholic household, but the importance of that process.
There's 1.3 billion Catholics around the world. I also remember it. I can vividly remember we're seeing the white smoke coming out as it was being shown on the TV, and I was in college.
A very important and
yes,
very well-watched process indeed. So, in the event of a successful election, a new pope is asked if he accepts, and then in the event that he accepts, he is tasked with choosing a new name to use. Now, Pope-born Jorge Mario Bergoglio decided to go with Francis as his title. Once this selection accepts the position and chooses his name, the longest-serving cardinal deacon, known as the protodeacon, announces Habemus Papam, or we have a pope. At that point, the new pope will emerge to the masses and give his first blessing. From that point, the future of the Catholic Church and the direction that the culture, politics, and works of that church will be on a new path under the direction of a new pope.
That's going to be really interesting in the coming weeks. There's a lot of history that will be made, and millions and billions of people around the world will be watching.
Absolutely. Well, Renatta, thank you for coming on to help Western Pennsylvania get a enlightened piece on this revered history-making tradition.
No problem. It's very secretive and really interesting process.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this week's episode, share the podcast to help keep Western PA locally informed with insightful discussion and the latest news from your area. It's an easy way to spread the word, and it helps our podcast reach more people like you. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and turn on episode notifications so you never miss new content. Once again, I'm Zac Gibson, and this is From the Newsroom.